I've already shared your home address with the whole neighborhood group, so I'd watch myself if I were you." That was Brenda Falk, president of the Cedar Bluff Homeowners Association for 9 years running, standing on the public side of my fence on a Tuesday morning in April, holding her phone up like a badge. She had posted my street address, my full name, and a photograph of my front door into a group of 1,100 people, with a caption telling them I was a danger to the community and they should make their displeasure known. She thought that would frighten me into tearing out the workshop I had built on my own land. What she did not know was that I had spent 22 years as a permit examiner for the county building department, and I knew exactly where every permit she and her husband had ever pulled was filed, and exactly which ones did not exist at all. So I want to ask you something before I tell you the rest. If someone put your address in front of 1,100 strangers to scare you off land your wife had picked out before she died, what would you have done? What? 'Cause I did not raise my voice. I went inside and I opened a folder. My name is Walter Hale. I am 61 years old. For most of my working life, I sat at a counter on the second floor of the county administration building and checked other people's construction permits against other people's plans, which means I spent 22 years learning the difference between what people build. I learned that the truth of a property is not what stands on it. It is what is written down about it, filed and stamped and dated, and that a man with the right piece of paper and the patience to produce it at the right moment. I checked setbacks and easements and lot lines until I could read a legal description the way other men read a box score. I retired 4 years ago with a good pension and a bad knee and a habit I could not put down, which was keeping records of everything that crossed my hands. I live on 3.5 acres at the edge of Cedar Bluff, in a single-story house my late wife Diane and I bought the spring before she got sick. She is the one who found the place. I remember the day. The realtor had shown us 6 houses that did not fit, and we were tired, and we almost did not stop at the 7th. Diane walked the side yard while I talked to the agent on the gravel, and when I came around the corner of the house, she was standing in the tall grass with her hands shading her eyes, looking at the ridgeline to the east. And she said, "This is where you put your shop, Walter, right here, where you can see the hills." She was not asking. She had already decided, the way she decided things, quietly and completely. And co. We signed the papers 2 weeks later, and the first thing she did when we moved in was drive to the county and pull the plat and the deed, and read every word of both, because Diane never trusted a thing she had not read herself. I told her I checked deeds for a living and she did not need to. She said that was exactly why she did need to. She got sick that fall. She was gone within 2 years, and she never saw the shop go up, but she chose the spot, and I built it the year after she passed, because building it was the only way I knew to keep a promise to her. I poured the slab myself on a hot week in July, with our daughter June handing me tools and reading me the level. I framed it over the autumn. I wired it and roofed it, and hung the doors, and I put my saws and my planes and Diane's old radio in it, and every screw in that building has a story she is part of, even the ones she never saw driven. It is a widower's reason to get up in the morning. The workshop sits 110 feet back from the road, on the rear third of my parcel, well inside my own property line. I pulled a permit for it. I pulled a real one, because I am the kind of man who has spent his whole life making sure other people pulled real ones. I have the stamped approval, the inspection sign-offs, the final certificate of occupancy. It is the cleanest little building in the county, and Brenda Falk decided it had to come down because she did not like that. I sometimes had 2 trucks parked outside it on a Saturday. The trouble started small, the way it always does. The first thing I got was a letter. It came in a cream-colored envelope with the association seal embossed in the corner, very official looking. And inside was a notice that my property was in violation of the community aesthetic covenant for operating what they called an unapproved commercial enterprise. I read it twice. I do woodworking. I make furniture for people who ask, and sometimes they pay me. And sometimes I give it away. And there is nothing commercial about a retired man building a cradle for his neighbor's grandchild. More than that, though, the letter assumed a thing that was not true. It assumed Cedar Bluff HOA had jurisdiction over my land. It did not. My 3.5 acres were platted in 1978, 11 years before the Cedar Bluff subdivision was recorded. My parcel was never annexed into the association. Diane and I had checked that before we bought it, because Diane never trusted a thing she had not read herself. There was no covenant running with my deed. There was no membership. There was a hand-drawn line on a plat map at the county that put my back fence right at the edge of where their authority stopped and my family's land began. I knew that line existed because I had pulled the plat the week we made the offer. And I had kept a copy, the way I keep copies of everything. I wrote Brenda a short letter back. I was polite. I told her my parcel predated the subdivision and was not subject to the covenant, and I attached a copy of the recorded plat, and I said I would be glad to walk the line with her if she had any doubt. I dropped it in the mail on a Thursday. That was the last time I tried to fix this the easy way. She never answered the letter. Buyer. What she did instead was open a file on me. And over the next 2 years, she filled it. One escalation at a time, and I filled mine right alongside hers. The second thing was the fines. They came monthly after that, each one a little higher than the last, printed on the same cream paper with the same embossed seal. The first one was $200. I remember opening it at the kitchen table with June across from me, doing her homework, and she watched my face and asked what it was. And I told her it was a bill for a debt I did not owe, and I set it down and finished my coffee. The next month it was $400. The month after that it was $6. Each notice used the same language, accruing penalty, continued noncompliance, and each one threatened the next step if I did not bring my property into conformance, which meant tearing down the building Diane had picked the spot for. By the end of the first summer, the association ledger said I owed them $4,200 in accumulated penalties for a structure they had no authority to fine. I never paid a cent. I want to be clear about that, because people hear fines and they think a bill is a bill. A fine from a body with no jurisdiction over you is not a bill. It is a piece of paper claiming a thing that is not so. And the correct response to a claim that is not so is not to argue with it and not to pay it, but to file it where you can find it again. So, that is what I did. I bought a box of manila folders, and I labeled the first one with the month and the year, and into it went every notice. And on the back of each one I wrote in pencil the day it arrived and the day I logged it, and I put them in order, oldest at the back. The folder got thick by August. That was fine number 1 through 7, and I want you to remember that count. 7. Because the gap between what they claimed they could take from me and what they could ever lawfully collect is the entire spine of this story. I should tell you about Brenda, because she is the engine of all of this, and I want you to hear her the way I heard her. She drove a white luxury SUV with a vanity plate, and she wore a linen blazer over yoga pants to walk the neighborhood with a clipboard. and she had a way of pushing her sunglasses up onto the top of her head when she wanted you to know she was about to be reasonable at you. The first time she came to my fence in person, the spring of that first year, she stood with her kitten heels sinking into the gravel of my shoulder, and she said, "This parcel is functionally part of our community. Hail, whether your paperwork says so or not, and we maintain standards here, functionally part of our community." I have thought about that phrase a great deal. It is the phrase of a person who has never once been told no and believed it. What I did not know yet that first spring was why she cared so much about 3.5 acres of woodshop in Ridgeview. A fine is a fine. Most HOA presidents would have sent the letters and moved on to the next mailbox that was the wrong color. Brenda kept coming. She kept coming for 2 years. And it took me most of that time to understand that the reason had nothing to do with my table saw. Her husband was Dale Falk, and Dale Falk owned a development company. And Dale Falk had quietly bought the 4 undeveloped lots that backed up against the rear of my property on the far side of my fence. He wanted to build 6 more houses back there, high-end ones with a private drive, and a private drive to those lots needed an easement. And the only practical place to run that easement was straight across the rear third of my parcel, right through the slab where my workshop stood. They did not want me gone because my trucks were ugly. They wanted me gone because my land was the road they had not bought yet. I learned that in the second year, and I will tell you how. But first, I have to walk you up the rest of the staircase, because every step matters when the bill finally comes due. The third escalation was the inspector. On a Monday morning in the fall of the first year, a man in a polo shirt and pressed khakis pulled up to my gate in a sedan, got out with a clipboard and a laminated badge swinging on a lanyard, and called across the fence that he was there to conduct a structural compliance inspection. I had been sanding a tabletop, and I came out wiping my hands on a rag, and I took my time doing it. I asked him which department. He said, "The building department." I asked him, "Which office, 2nd floor or 3rd?" because I knew the building department was on the 2nd floor and had been for 30 years, and any real inspector would have answered without thinking. He said he would have to check. Then I asked him for his examiner number. He blinked at me. There is a number. Every county field inspector carries one, a format I could recite in my sleep because I assigned a few hundred of them myself over the years, and this man did not have one and did not even know that he should. I looked at the badge on his chest. The logo on it was not the county seal. It was the Cedar Bluff Association crest, printed on a card and laminated to look like government issue, the kind of thing you can order online for $9. I told him, "You can stand on that road as long as you like. It is public. You are not, however, setting one boot on my land. And if I hear you have told one more person that you work for the county, I will drive down to the office where I worked for 22 years and file a report for impersonating a public official, and I will know exactly which clerk to hand it to." He stood there a moment with his mouth working, and then he got back in his sedan and left. I wrote all of it down before I went back inside. The date, the time he arrived, the time he left, the wording he used, the fake crest. I walked to the road and photographed his car and his plate. That went in the folder with the rest. That was the day my daughter started helping me, and I should tell you about June, because she is the reason half of this was caught on record at all. Her name is June. She is 17, and she came to live with me full-time after Diane passed. And she is sharper than I was at her age, by a wide margin. She had watched the inspector from the front window with her chin on the sill, and when his sedan turned out of sight, she came onto the porch in her socks and said, "Dad, You should be writing down what time he got here." I told her I already had, and I showed her the line in the folder. She read it, and she looked at me, and she said, "We should have a camera." 2. Really. 1 for the gate and 1 for the shop. So we put up cameras. June ordered them and June mounted them, 1 on the gate post and 1 on the corner of the shop facing the back fence, and she ran them to a drive in the house and set up a second drive that I kept in a drawer in the kitchen, so there were always 2 copies of everything. She labeled the video folders by date, the same way I labeled the paper ones. And she took over the running log on a yellow legal pad, in her small, neat handwriting, a line for every contact, the date, the time, what was said, and by whom. At the top of the first page, she wrote 2 words and underlined them. Our side. That is what we called the whole record after that. Our side. When a notice came, June logged it. When Brenda came to the fence, June timed it. She treated it like the most serious thing she had ever been handed, because, in a way, it was. The 4th escalation was the customers. People came to me for work by word of mouth, a table here, a set of shelves there, a repair on a rocking chair. Somebody's grandfather had made. And that fall, the words started coming back to me strange. A man named Carl, who had ordered a dining table half paid for, called on a Saturday to cancel, and he was awkward about it. And when I asked him plainly what had changed, he finally said, somebody from the association had called his house and told him I was running an illegal business out of a building under investigation, and that anyone who hired me might find their own name in a complaint. A woman who wanted bookshelves for her daughter's room told me a person in a linen blazer had stopped her by her car in the grocery lot, leaned in close, and warned her in a low, confidential voice that Mr. Hale was about to lose his property, and she would be wise to take her business elsewhere. I lost 6 jobs that season. I sat down one night and added it up. The deposits I returned, and the work that never came. And it was somewhere near $9,000 gone because Brenda Falk was making phone calls and cornering people in parking lots. I did not call any of those customers back to argue, because arguing was not the point, and never had been. Instead, I wrote down each cancellation, the date, the customer, and word for word what they told me they had been told. And I asked the 2 who were willing, Carl and the woman with the bookshelves, whether they would be willing to put it in writing someday, if it ever mattered. Both said yes. Carl said he would be glad to, that the call had made his skin crawl. I thanked them, and I filed their names with the rest, and I did not know yet that a court would one day read those 2 pages, but I kept them, as if it would, because that is the whole discipline. You keep it as if it will matter, so that on the day it does, it is already there. By then it was a year in, and June asked me one night at the kitchen table, over the legal pad, why I did not just go down to the sheriff and make it stop. It was a fair question, and I did not have a good answer. So the next week, I went. I sat down across a desk from a deputy named Ross Pruitt, a calm, younger man with a steady way of writing while you talked, and I laid it out plainly, the letter, the fines, the fake inspector, the lost customers. He took notes the whole time, and when I finished, he set his pen down flat on the desk and told me the truth of how it actually works, which I think every property owner ought to hear. He said, "Mr. Coles, Ale, when somebody files a complaint with us, we have to respond to it, even when it smells like nonsense, because we do not get to decide it is nonsense until we have looked." He told me the association had already filed 3 nuisance complaints against me, that he could see in the system, and that each one had to be run down. Then he said the part that changed how I worked. He said the way you beat a thing like this is not one phone call, And it is not losing your temper at her fence. It is a pattern. You build a record. You write down every single contact, the date and the time and what was said, and you keep it in strict order, and you save your footage. And when there are enough of them that a judge can see the shape of the whole thing at a glance, then it stops being your word against hers and starts being evidence. I asked him how many was enough. He thought about it and gave me a rough figure. He said once you have got something like a dozen documented incidents that show a coordinated course of conduct, you have got a thing a court will take seriously. A dozen. I drove home doing the arithmetic. 6 lost customers I had documented. I was already past a dozen, and I had not even known I was counting toward anything. I came in and told June we had a number, now and what it was, and she did not say a word. She just turned to a fresh page on the legal pad and wrote it at the top and underlined it twice 12. From that night on, every line she logged toward the count. The 5th escalation was the lawsuit. In the spring of the 2nd year, the association sued me in civil court to compel removal of the workshop and to collect the accumulated fines, which, by then, their ledger put at $7,800. I was served on a Saturday morning by a process server who seemed embarrassed to be doing it. A heavy-set man who would not meet my eye and said, "Sorry, sir," twice. June brought me the envelope on the porch and stood there with her arms folded while I read it. A lawsuit is a frightening thing to most people, and I will not pretend my hands did not go a little cold holding it, because the threat in it was the lien, and the lien was on the house, and the house was the one Diane found. A lawsuit is also, though, a thing that happens in a courtroom, on a record, in front of a person whose entire job is to read the documents and rule on them. A courtroom is the one place on earth where a quiet, true piece of paper outranks a loud, confident voice. For 2 years, I had been waiting for somebody to force me to lay my paperwork in front of a person paid to read it. Brenda had just written a filing fee to do exactly that, and I told June she has finally done the one thing I could not make her do. I hired a lawyer, a local woman named Tess Okafor, who did property work and did not waste words, and the first thing she did after she read my folder cover to cover was sit back and go quiet for a long minute, and then she said, "Mr. Priding, Hale, you understand, you have already won this. You just have to show up and let me put the paper on the table." She pulled the recorded plat. She pulled my deed. Then she pulled the thing that mattered most, the association's own recorded declaration, the founding document that listed by legal description every parcel bound by the covenant, and she read the bound parcels aloud to me one at a time across her desk. It had never been among them. The association had been fining, threatening, impersonating, and now suing a piece of land that its own charter said was none of its business. Tess did one more thing, though, and this is where the second story, underneath the first one, came up into the light. She set down the declaration and said, "Mr. Hale, women do not spend 2 years in a lawyer's retainer over a wood shop. Why does she want you gone?" And she went, looking through the county records, the way I had not known how to look, business filings, and planning submissions, and lot transfers, and she came back with a folder of her own. Dale Falks Development Company. The 4 undeveloped lots behind my rear fence, bought quietly, in the company name, 18 months back. And a preliminary site plan Dale had submitted to the planning office for a cluster of 6 high-end homes served by a private access drive. She laid that site plan down next to my plat on her desk and lined up the property lines and the access drive. The only road that made the 6 houses possible ran in a straight line across the rear third of my parcel, directly over my slab, through the wall where my drill press stood. I want to be careful here, because I am a man who deals only in what can be proven. I did not know that Brenda Falk woke up every morning thinking about my land. What I knew was that the document existed, that it was dated and filed in her husband's company name, and that it explained every single thing that had happened to me for 2 years, better than any other story could. The trucks were never the problem. The road was the problem, and I was standing on it. June had come with me that day, and she leaned over the desk and looked from the site plan to the plat and back, and she said it before either of us. Quietly, "They need our land for the road." She was 17 and she had it in 4 seconds. Tess made 3 copies of everything. 1 for the file, 1 for the drawer at home, 1 she kept in her office safe. The 6th escalation is the one I think about the most, because it is the one where Brenda stopped being an expensive nuisance and became something I had to protect my daughter from. It was a Wednesday evening in the late summer of the 2nd year, going on dusk. I was 40 minutes away across the county picking up a load of white oak, and June was home alone doing schoolwork at the kitchen table. And a truck I had never seen pulled up to my gate, and 2 men got out with bolt cutters, and they put the jaws to the chain on my gate and started cutting it so they could bring equipment onto the back of my land. June called me. I want you to hear how that call actually went, the real shape of it, because it is the only time in this whole story that my own voice was not level. She said, "Dad, there's 2 men. They're cutting the gate." The words did not come out as a sentence. They came out in pieces, and I was already up out of my chair at the lumberyard and moving for the truck before she finished the second one. I told her, "Go inside, lock the door, do not go out. There are the cameras running." She said yes. Then she said, in a smaller voice, "One of them keeps looking at the house." I told her, "Stay back from the windows, hang up and call the sheriff right now, and then call me back and stay on the line with me until you hear the sirens." And she did, every bit of it, exactly. In order, when she had every reason to be too scared to think, she was steadier than I had any right to expect a 17-year-old to be with 2 strangers at the gate, and her father half an hour away. By the time I came down my own road too fast, Deputy Pruitt's cruiser was already nosed into the driveway with its lights going, and the 2 men and their truck were long gone, and the cut chain was lying in the gravel in 2 pieces. And June was standing in the open doorway with the second camera drive already in her hand, because she had thought, in the middle of all of it, to pull it before anyone could ask her to or anyone could take it. 17 years old, and she had secured the evidence. I put my arms around her right there in the doorway, and neither of us said anything for a while. The men had been hired by Dale Falk's company. The cameras got the truck, the plate, the bolt cutters, and 1 clear shot of a face. Deputy Pruitt stood in my kitchen that night and looked at the footage on June's laptop, and his whole manner changed. Cutting a chain on a gate is one thing. Cutting it to bring heavy equipment onto land, you have been told in writing, is not yours, with a minor alone in the house 30 yards away, is a different thing, and he knew it, and he wrote it up as attempted criminal trespass and named the company. That was incident number 11 in June's count. The next morning she drew a line under it and wrote 1 more below, because the day after the gate, a final fine notice arrived, demanding $9,400 and threatening that the association would place a lien on my home. 12. We had our 12. The day before the gate, Brenda had stood at the edge of my property 1 more time, for what turned out to be the last time, and said the thing that sealed it. June had her phone out on the porch and recorded all of it, lawfully, in a one-party state, and Brenda did not know or did not care. She said, "This is going to keep getting worse until you understand that you are functionally part of our jurisdiction, and you will comply." There it was again. Functionally part of our jurisdiction. The third time, I had heard some version of it, and the first time it was on a recording with a date stamp, 8 days before she sent men with bolt cutters to make it true. Now, I have to slow down, because what happened next did not happen in a shouting match at my fence. It happened in a quiet room with a long counter, and it took about as long as it takes to read a paragraph out loud. The lawsuit had a hearing date in the fall of the second year, in a small courtroom in the county building, the same building where I had worked for 22 years. I knew the floor. I knew the clerk. I walked in wearing the one good jacket I own, with June beside me in the second row, and Tess at the table with my folder squared in front of her, and across the aisle sat Brenda Falk in a magenta blazer with her lawyer, and behind them, for reasons that became clear, sat Dale Falk, who had never once shown his face at my fence. Brenda's lawyer spoke first, and spoke for a while, about community standards and aesthetic harmony, and the burden my unapproved structure placed on the neighborhood. The judge, a tired and careful woman named Judge Marsh, listened to all of it. Then she asked the question that ends these things. She asked the association's lawyer to direct the court to the provision of the recorded declaration that included my parcel within the association's authority. There was a pause. The lawyer shuffled paper. He said he would need a moment. Judge Marsh said, "Take your moment." Tess stood up. She said, "Your Honor, we can save everyone the time." And she walked 3 documents up to the clerk's counter and laid them down side by side and asked that all 3 be entered into the record. The recorded plat from 1978, showing my parcel as a separate legal lot 11 years before the subdivision was ever recorded. My deed, with its legal description and no covenant attached to it anywhere. And the association's own recorded declaration, the one their lawyer had just failed to find the right page of, with its schedule of bound parcels. And she read the parcel numbers into the room one by one, slowly. And mine was not among them. 3 pieces of paper. The clerk stamped each one with the date, and the small, flat sound of that stamp was the loudest thing in the room. Judge Marsh took all 3 and read them herself, in no hurry, her glasses down on her nose, and the courtroom was so quiet I could hear the clock. I watched Brenda's face across the aisle over those 30 seconds, and I saw it travel from certainty, the same certainty she had worn at my fence for 2 years, into something I had not once seen on her, which was doubt, and then past doubt into the understanding that she had brought all of us here to read aloud the proof that she had been wrong from the very first letter. Judge Marsh set the papers down and said the association had no jurisdiction over my parcel, had never had jurisdiction, and that every fine levied was void. She dismissed the removal claim. She looked at the accumulated fine figure in the complaint, $9,400, and she said the association had spent 2 years and a great deal of money trying to collect a debt that had never existed. Then Tess asked to be heard on one more matter, and she entered the recording from the porch, and the footage from the gate, and Deputy Pruitt's report, and the site plan with the access drive crossing my slab. And Judge Marsh, who had started the morning hearing a property dispute, understood in about a minute that she was looking at something else. Here are the 2 numbers I want you to hold next to each other, because they are the whole case in your hand. The association's ledger claimed I owed $9,400. The amount they were lawfully entitled to collect from me, across 2 years and 1,100 neighbors and 2 men with bolt cutters, was 0. Not a reduced amount, not a settlement. 0. The document that decided it had been recorded in 1978, signed by a county surveyor who was dead long before Brenda Falk ever pushed her sunglasses up onto her head, and it had been sitting in the county vault the entire time, deciding the case before the case was ever filed. The collapse came fast. After that, the way these things do once the first paper falls. The recording and the gate footage and the site plan went from a civil courtroom to the district attorney's office. The two men were charged. The company was named. And here is the proportionate part, the part Diane would have called the land settling its own accounts. Dale Falk's 6-home development could not be built without the access drive, and the access drive could not cross my parcel, and a criminal case attached to the company froze his financing while it was pending. The road he tried to take by force was the one thing he could not buy, and without it, the lots behind my fence were just 4 pieces of ground he had paid too much for. He did not lose them to me. He lost them to the same county records he thought he could go around. Brenda was removed as association president by her own board within the month. Once the lawsuit and the criminal filing became neighborhood knowledge, because 1,100 people do not enjoy learning that their monthly dues had quietly been funding a private road scheme dressed up as aesthetic enforcement. Several of them, I heard later, had received the same kind of letters over far smaller things, a fence stain, a boat in a driveway, and had simply paid. The address she had posted to frighten me into a group of 1,100 strangers was the same group she had to read her resignation into. I did not write that resignation, and I did not attend the meeting where she read it. I did not have to. The documents wrote it for her. The same documents that had been sitting in the county vault the whole time. I want to take you back to my kitchen one last time, because the part that matters most to me did not happen in the courtroom. It happened the evening after, when June and I came home, and she put the folder, our side, back on the shelf by the door where it had lived for 2 years, and she ran her thumb down the spine of it the way you touch something you are done needing but will never throw away. She said, "Mom would have loved that you kept everything." And she would have. Diane is the one who taught me to read a thing before I sign it and keep a copy after. She picked that side yard for my shop. She stood right where the drill press is now and told me where to put my life, and a man tried to run a road through it. And he could not, because a woman who has been gone 4 years had already made sure the line was drawn and recorded and true. The ridge is still there out the shop window. June can see it when she comes out to hand me a clamp. I am going to be in that building until I cannot lift a board anymore, and then it is hers. So let me step out and tell you plainly what this was about. Because I promised you a lesson, and I keep my promises. If you own your land, go to the county and pull your plat and your deed. And read the legal description yourself today, before anyone gives you a reason to find out exactly where your line is, and what, if anything, runs with your title. If a board, or an association, or anyone with a clipboard tells you that you are part of something, ask them to show you the recorded document that says so, and do not accept a letter, a logo, or a confident voice as proof. Keep a folder. Write down every contact, the date, the time, what was said, and keep the copies in order, because the day you need it, you will not have time to build it. Put a camera where it can see your gate. And understand that a loud person who never checks the deed is not strong. They are exposed. And the quiet record you keep is the thing that ends it. If you have ever had a clipboard tell you it owned your home, tell me about it down in the comments. I read them, and there are more of us than you think. Subscribe if you want to hear the next one, because next week I am going to tell you about the retired water rights examiner 3 counties over whose new neighbor drained a shared pond to build a swim club, never once checking who actually held the rights to the water. He found out the hard way. I will see you then.